Hi, my name is Brittany Allen, and today I'm going to be talking about self and identity, which I think is something that I know I tend to have a hard time with taking the time to analyze this deeply. So, this is going to be a talk about how do we become who we are, how are we making sense of ourselves, and how psychology gives us tools to explore this, beginning as early as 2 years old to the time we're adults and ongoing. So, the first topic we're going to talk about is what is called I versus me, or otherwise kind of known as reflexivity. So, this is our ability to reflect on ourselves. It was what allows the I or the experiencing self to look inward and consider the me, consider ourselves as an object. So we do this when we say things like, I'm proud of myself, I'm disappointed in myself. We're using the I to evaluate the me. So it's also very similar to if you think of standing in front of a mirror, the I is the person looking and the me is the reflection. They're the same, but we're looking at ourselves as an object. Um, the capacity to think about ourselves in this way is what helps really make personal identity possible. And it's what helps us constantly evaluate who we are. Do we want to change? All of those type of things. So, from there, to create our sense of self, we do have three perspectives that we typically take on. We can think of ourselves as having three different roles. So, the first role is the self as an actor. This begins in early childhood. We become aware of how we act in social situations. So, around age 2, we start recognizing ourselves in mirrors and we begin to show personal personal emotions like embarrassment or pride. And that is the self as actor emerging. It emerges at this age, but it remains constant throughout our life. The next perspective that emerged would be self as adult. So this occurs around middle childhood. We start thinking of ourselves as goal setters. Um, in early childhood, this would be something like wanting to know what you want to be when you grow up, or maybe wanting to join the soccer team. Um, we start to form preferences, values, and we begin to plan. So we also start, having favorite foods, favorite colors, um, having a sense of right from wrong. Um, so often, like for example, for myself, I can remember around this time really developing a strong sense of wanting to be a veterinarian when I got older. And that gave me goals to strive for. Even if that at that age, the goal was just to take care of animals. That continued to develop as I got older. Then the last perspective we have is self as author. So in adolescence and beyond, this is when we begin to create a life story. So we try to make sense of our past, and we more realistically, I would say, than middle school or middle childhood, we start to imagine what we want our future to look like. Um, we become authors of our own identities. So that's where the sense of self as author comes into play. And then from there, we continue to develop a sense of self. A sense of self develops into layers. It's always occurring, it's always happening um, throughout all of life. Again, we already talked about as children, we'll begin understanding ourselves as social actors. So, this is when we start to react to things like praise and punishment and realize that we can affect others. At this stage, our early sense of self is really grounded in emotions and roles. So, young kids really ground themselves in I'm the big sister, or my mom says I'm smart, or I'm funny. By the time we develop a theory of mind, which is when we start to understand that others have thoughts and feelings, this is when we begin to consider how others might see us. And then this in turn builds the foundation for motivated agency, where you begin setting goals, choosing values, and we strive to find, okay, what is the meaning of life, or what do I want my purpose in life to be? And then from there into adolescence, this is when our self becomes more complex. That's why that teenager time is really when it feels like we are asking ourselves, who am I? What do I want to be? What do I like? And that's also when we start developing something called narrative identity. So, narrative identity is the story that we tell ourselves about who we are, what has happened to us, and where we're going to go from here. It's how we create coherence and meaning within our lives. In turn, psychologically, that can really help us make sense of hardship. So, for example, we could say, yes, my job laid me off, but it helped me pursue school. Or, yes, my boyfriend broke up with me, but it helped me find this new, greater person. Or it helped me discover my sense of self again. Our narrative identity also often really reflects the values of our society or the values that we were raised with, whether that is independence or family loyalty. We really tie our narrative identity to those values. So, to kind of summarize here, the self is not a fixed thing. It's layered, it's changing, it's always evolving. I think that back to the person I was even just a year ago is different than the person that I am today. From the reflexive I evaluating the me to being an actor, agent, and author, we are constantly building who we are. And through narrative identity, we take all of our experiences, good and bad, and turn them into meaning. I saw this funny quote that I included here about how we are the author of our lives, but unfortunately, we're writing in pen and can't erase my mistakes. Um, I thought that was both funny, but also it is interesting to think that we are not living a life, we're writing one through developing who we want to be and developing what our sense of self is. Okay, that's all for me. Thank you.